Did you know there have been cryptids that have turned out to be real? You probably heard the word cryptid, or at least tales of horrifying unknown creatures scientists can't explain once in your life. Some of the more popular ones in North America at least are creatures like Bigfoot and the Mothman. There are also so many other ones that other cultures have mentioned, like the Yeti, El Chupacabra, the Jersey Devil and the Loch Ness Monster, Krakens, and ancient sea serpents. They're all terrifying in their own right. Cryptids are basically described as a creature that science refused to acknowledge because their entire existence is based only on eyewitness accounts and folklore passed from generation to generation of people who saw something horrifying they couldn't explain. For the most part, science is right to question whether these animals really exist, most of the time. But scattered throughout history, there have been times where those eyewitness accounts of these monsters turned out to be completely real. Hey, I'm Fossil Fruit, and today we're going over 12 times cryptids were proven to exist. The Jersey Devil has been talked about and seen in New Jersey for longer than New Jersey has even been a state. The first documented sighting was in 1909, when residents across multiple towns like Trenton and Woodbury all reported seeing a giant massive winged monster flying through the night and making a screaming sound. It then proceeded to terrify witnesses over several days, who all described it with a horse-like head, enormous wings, and a long spaded tail, all paired with a horrifying shriek of death. It scared people so badly that they began locking their doors and schools literally closed down. The even more horrifying bit is that the sightings weren't new. Native Americans centuries before 1909 also described the same thing. There were a series of different origin stories people also came up with for the monster. The most famous one involves a woman known as Mother Leeds, who cursed her 13th unwanted child during pregnancy, which, if we pause for a second, is an insane number of children to have. She was literally spawn camping the kid with the curse. According to the legend, the child was born normally and then transformed into a winged horned monster and fled into the forest across the New Jersey coast. Some researchers proposed the idea that the sightings were large birds or sandhill cranes that people mistook for the monsters. Other wild theories suggest the New Jersey Devil was some kind of surviving creature from the Cretaceous period. The most plausible answer is that what people were seeing was probably the hammerhead bat. The hammerhead bat is found in lowland forests, mangroves, and swamps. The bat itself is classified as a megabat, meaning it's very large, as you can decipher from the name. Male bats have a very big head that is just horrifying to look at. Their heads even look similar to the horse description many legends told. During mating season too, the males make a loud honking sound that can be heard from really far away. Somehow hammerhead bats were placed in the New Jersey forest, which led to people spreading rumors of the cryptic Jersey Devil, giving an explanation to centuries of people being terrified by a giant flying winged creature. Before anyone gave this creature a name, people were having encounters with something in the forests of West Africa and were terrified by what they saw. The Greek explorer Hano the Navigator described seeing enormous hair-covered creatures when he traveled across the African coast in the 15th century BC. His interpreters at the time called them gorillae. While modern scientists believe Hano was describing chimpanzees or baboons, the name stuck. In 1625, an English explorer named Andrew Battelle described seeing human-like monsters that would visit his campfire every morning after he left while he was in Angola. He said he noticed these monsters would stay by the fire to get warm and then return to the forest, but they never figured out how to add more wood to the fire. Gorillas remained legend until April 1847, when American physician and missionary Thomas Savage got sick while traveling in West Africa. This forced him to stay at a colleague's home in Gabon. There, his host showed him a large skull of a monster. This monkey-like creature was a remarkable size to him, and Savage immediately realized it didn't belong to any known ape. Savage took 2 skulls with him and went back to the United States. There, he worked with Harvard anatomist Jeffries Wieman to figure out what new species it was. In 1847, the discovery was announced at the Boston Society of Natural History with the name Troglodytes gorilla, known as gorilla. British paleontologist Richard Owen, to his horror, described the gorilla as the most portentous and diabolical character of humanity that an atrabilious poet ever conceived or a naturalist ever realized. What a terrifying way to describe a gorilla. The mountain gorilla, on the other hand, known as Gorilla beringii, continued to be a cryptid even after the western gorillas were confirmed to be real. The mountain gorilla was not yet identified by Western science until 1902, when German Captain Robert von Beringa encountered one to his terror. The animal had struck fear into all the campfire visitors in Angola, and now that monster is known to be the largest primate ever discovered on Earth. Long before any scientists from the West ever set foot on the island of Komodo, the locals spoke of a monster living on the island, the giant lizard of Komodo, a horrifying cryptid. The stories consisted of a giant dragon creature that walked around the volcanic landscape. Some of the locals described an animal so powerful it could tear apart deer or wild pigs without even trying. The scariest part were these stories weren't vague. Instead, all the stories told by the people of Komodo matched a specific theme and had similar details. Despite the stories being consistent, for decades scientists dismissed the folklore as false and refused refused to believe a giant dragon-like creature could be alive today. The dismissals held until 1910 when Dutch colonial officer Lieutenant Stein van Hensbroek heard more reports of a walking land crocodile of an unusually large size and actually went to investigate. His investigation was successful as he came back with a photograph and skin. These were sent to Peter Owens, the director of zoological and botanical gardens in Buitenzer. Owens immediately recognized the animal as a new species and published the first formal scientific description in 1912. The creature wasn't a crocodile and was instead a monitor lizard that was extremely big and had been living on the island for around 1 million years. Explorer W. Douglas Burden was not satisfied with just the skin in a published paper. In 1926, he went on an expedition to the island himself. He then returned to New York City carrying 12 specimens, including literal live animals. He had brought back 2 live Komodo dragons, which were placed on display at the Bronx Zoo. People were stunned to see an animal that literally looked like a dinosaur walking around in a zoo. The spectacle was so insane at the time that it inspired filmmaker Marin C. Cooper to create the 1933 classic King Kong. Today, Komodo dragons are known to grow up to 3 meters in length and are among the most efficient predators on Earth. Their saliva carries a horrifying venom that prevents blood clotting, which lowers the blood pressure in his prey until it can induce shock. They can reproduce like normal, or the females can even produce offspring without a male. There are around 3,000 Komodo dragons remaining in the wild across a few islands in eastern Indonesia, and they are considered an endangered species. For a majority of human history, the giant squid has been a very prominent cryptid. The idea of sea serpents stretches back centuries, with fishermen talking about giant tentacle monsters coming up from the deep and swallowing ships. The giant squid, akin to this, ducks, was the answer to these tales. While specimens of the squid have been found on the shore dying or already dead, no squid has been found in its natural habitat, so the creature stayed a semi-legend for a period of time, until September 30th, 2004. Japanese researchers Tsunemi Kubadera of the National Science Museum in Tokyo and Kiyoshi Mori of the Ogasawara Whale Watching Association spent 2 years deploying bait lines almost 900 meters below the surface in the North Pacific. They based their line drops on the data from sperm whale hunting patterns, all to try to guess where giant squids would most likely be. On the 23rd attempt at 9:15 in the morning, the scientists witnessed something horrifying. An 8-meter-long squid attacked the bait line they had dropped, and the squid became entangled. For the next 4 hours, the animals attempted to free itself, allowing the researchers to take over 550 photographs of it. When the squid tore itself off, it also left something very valuable to researchers. Its 5.5-meter tentacle had ripped off, which allowed scientists to do DNA research on it. This proved the appendage belonged to Arthetius. The photographs changed the rumors forever, with many scientists before theorizing that the giant squid were mostly slow and passive creatures. The footage the scientists gathered showed the complete opposite with the way it attacked the bait, and Kubadera described the attack as a large snake enveloping and holding its prey. The way the squid wrapped its tentacles around the bait matched a python wrapping its body around the prey before attacking. In 2012, the first video footage of a live squid was captured in the wild near Chichijima in the North Pacific. This footage was filmed from a submersible that followed the animal all the way down to 900 meters. Giant squids are estimated to grow up to about 12 to 13 meters long, proving that they were real, more aggressive, and not just a cryptid that fishermen talk about on their journey out to sea. Not every cryptid comes from the 18th or 19th century with myths and culture surrounding it. In the 1970s in New Jersey, a community called Greekstown described a monster that had escaped and gone feral. The town of Greekstown sits along a canal in the quiet area without too much crazy wildlife. Over the next 3 years, tales began to come out from the community. People at night would see a dark, large shape moving in the fog near the canal path. Sometimes at dusk, people could hear movement down in the growth below. Despite people seeing it and hearing it, no one took any clear photographs. The story grew, and soon people believed a phantom or a ghost haunted the canal. The Greekstown cow became a local urban legend and a common ghost story in the community, with no one able to find it or prove it really existed. Then, in 2002, a cow was found in a ditch near the canal. The cow was very old and had signs of a very long life. The cow sadly died shortly after being removed from the ditch. The ghost of the Greekstown Canal ended up being a 30-year-old feral cow that had been living in New Jersey Canal the whole time. It's kind of silly how an animal as cute as cuddly as a cow could terrify so many people for so long. The next cryptid is one of the strangest looking animals ever documented. In 1798, Captain John Hunter, the second governor of New South Wales, sent a pelt and sketch to European scientists of some kind of impossible duck beaver. The sketch he sent was deeply disturbing to the scientists who saw it. The animal depicted had the bill of a duck, the body of an otter, the tail of a beaver, and webbed feet. It also reportedly laid eggs. Scientists in 18th century Europe did not believe such an animal could exist, with zoologist Robert Knox saying it must have been a fraud and the work of some kind of Asian taxidermist, all to try to fool the scientists of the time. Robert Knox even made another scientist, George Shaw, cut up the pelt to try to find stitches inside it, which he wasn't able to find. Several years later, and after a series of multiple expeditions, the platypus was found to be real, being one of the most weirdly insane looking animals in the animal kingdom. It is one of the only two surviving groups of manatremes. It is also part of the only group of mammals to lay eggs rather than giving birth. The males have a venomous spur on their hind legs that can send excruciating pain through their victim. The platypus also hunts entirely by electroreception, literally detecting the electric fields of muscle contractions in its prey through sensors in its bill. Its sweat glands also produce milk, so imagine how it smells. It's like someone made an animal from memory or went Frankenstein mode, combining whatever animal traits that came to their minds. The next cryptid is truly horrifying. When European explorers visited the dense forests of Central Africa during the 18th and 19th century, they kept hearing the same stories of a creature unlike anything they had seen before. The creature was described as almost like a unicorn. People explained it as part zebra, part donkey, part deer, part antelope, with stripes on his hind legs and a very, very long tongue. It soon got the nickname the African unicorn by Europeans because it sounded too insane to be true. The local African people who lived in the Utori forest with the animal had known it was real, but that was not enough to prove it to science. The okapi is a very difficult animal to find. It has the ability to move through dense undergrowth completely silently. Its striped pattern on its back hind legs also break up its outline, giving it a camouflage effect in the forest light. These two facts made it a cryptid that existed for a very long time, only being known to the millions of people in Central Africa and not to science. In 1901, Sir Harry Johnson took it upon himself to track down a skeleton and the skin of the animal and sent it to the British Museum. There, scientists classified it as an entirely new species. After genetic testing was done, they found the okapi's closest living relative was exclusively within the giraffe family. The African unicorn turned out to be real, and it had 2 horns. The next cryptid lives in the deep depths of the ocean. For centuries, sailors consistently described giant creatures coming out of the ocean, calling these terrifying monsters sea serpents. Some of these creatures were said to be big enough to completely eat a ship, and unlike anything that was seen in the water close to shore. The accounts were written by all kinds of different cultures, from Norwegian folklore to European myths, and even in Texas newspapers. The horrifying part is that all these stories had consistent details across them, meaning these monsters could have more validity than just another crazy sea story sailors tell. All the descriptions talked about the monster having an eel-like body, a distinct head, and a very weird movement. German scientist Ludwig Dorlin discovered the frilled shark in late 19th century, but all of his findings were lost in time. Later, American zoologist Samuel Garman documented and named the species in 1884. He described the creature as very likely to unsettle disbelief in what is popularly called the sea serpent. As you can see from the images, it's easy to understand where he got that idea from. The frilled shark has a horrifying set of teeth and gills with fleshy red tissue around its mouth, making it look like some kind of scary abomination. Its body is more similar to an eel than a shark, and it moves through the water slowly. Its jaw alone holds around 300 teeth in 25 rows, with each tooth shaped like a tiny spike facing inward that shreds up any animal it can get its mouth on. The frilled shark is also considered a living fossil. The shark's lineage goes back over 80 million years, meaning this animal has survived since the dinosaurs' mass extinction event and has not changed very much. The shark lives between 500 and 1500 meters underwater in the dark and cold ocean. All the sailors who found it in the 19th century were pretty close to describing it as a sea serpent because it genuinely looks like one. If you go into the mountains of western Papua, the Moni people of western Indonesia describe a cryptid called the man of the forest, or Badajezu. The Moni have consistently described the cryptid with similar attributes across generations. They all describe the man of the forest as a small creature that's covered in black and white fur and shaped similar to a miniature man. They describe the monster as living primarily in trees and occasionally walking upright like humans on the ground. The local customs held that these beings were ancestral spirits, and so the locals treated these cryptids with respect. The neighboring group, known as the Dani, did not have the same beliefs and hunted them instead. Western science did not believe the accounts, as there were no animals at the time found that matched the description. In the 1980s, Tim Flannery, a senior researcher with the Australian Museum in Sydney, received a photograph from the Maoki mountain range showing a picture of an unknown creature. After seeing it, Flannery immediately recognized the animal as a tree kangaroo, but the specific species was completely unknown to him. In May 1994, he surveyed the region's wildlife at an elevation range of 10,000 to 11,000 feet. This survey was conducted entirely in the dense mossy forests of the southern slopes of the Mani homeland. There, the researchers discovered something that shocked them. The animal they found in the survey was very similar to the Mani description of the cryptid, with the animal being black and white with a star on its forehead, roughly 30 inches tall, and it weighed around 30 pounds. Flannery formally described the species as Dendrolagus embiso in 1995. The name embiso in the Mani language means forbidden an animal, alluding to the culture of the Mani people to not hurt the animal. This means that the Mani's people cryptid was real and not just an unsubstantiated paranormal belief. Sadly, the Badigezu is currently a very endangered species. Next, we go to a monster you may have even encountered yourself despite it being a cryptid. In 1629, Dutch navigator Francisco Percelet encountered something very strange. While he was traveling along the Australian coast, he found a large cat-like animal with a pouch containing a smaller animal. He captured one, but it died during the voyage. European natural history researchers discussed the case out of curiosity, but most of them didn't believe it and chalked it up to just being a sailor's tale, and put it with all the other cryptids and fake stories of the time. It was not until June 1770 when Captain James Cook on the HMS Endeavour was forced ashore for repairs on the northern Australian coast. There, on July 14, 1770, a crewman shot an unknown animal and brought it back to the camp for examination. On the ship was Joseph Banks, a naturalist who described the animal in his journal, saying strange things like how it jumped on his hind legs like a hare. The animal weighed over 40 pounds and had no resemblance to any known European species. Banks recorded the monster with the name kangaroo. Even after the specimen was taken back to England, Europeans still did not believe it existed. In 1773, George Stubbs painted the creature based on the skin and rough sketches, and Europeans literally laughed at its possibility. To many people's surprise, the animal is real and not a cryptid, and a very popular animal that you can see in Australian outback today. If you're Australian, you'll have to comment below what you consider them. Do you think they're like an evil monster, or do you think of them as a cool animal? The next cryptid is in the Annamite Mountains, along the border between Vietnam and Laos. Local communities have described an animal that moves through the forest similar to a shadow. The animal had a long, backwards curving horn that was unlike any other type of animal. The cryptid was only seen alone. No one was ever able to take a photo of it before it ran away. According to the modern science in the 20th century, the animal did not exist and was a local legend. In 1992, a joint survey team from the Vietnamese Ministry of Forestry and the WWF were working in the Vu Quang Nature Reserve in north central Vietnam when they found something to their horror. They found a skull with long horns that didn't match any species known today. The researchers took the skull and named it the Saola, also known as Pseudo-Oryx enhensis, and it was the first large mammal discovered anywhere in the world since 1936. The facts around the Saola only add to the strangeness of the animal. It's estimated to weigh between 180 to 220 pounds. The Saola has a very large scent gland on both sides of his face, and the actual use of the glands is still being studied. No scientist has ever seen a living Saola in the wild. Camera traps have photographed the creature somewhere between a few dozen and 100 times, and is considered critically endangered. This animal may go extinct before scientists even have a chance to figure out its unique attributes and why it lives the way it does. The Eriomonte cat cryptid is not just a normal house cat. When you look at it straight on, it just looks like a plain wild cat. You might even think it's just some kind of tabby that lives outside. On the Japanese island of Eriomonte, local communities have maintained specific names, stories, and supernatural abilities for this animal, making it a cryptid. When Western scientists first heard of this cat, they dismissed the claims. They believed the cat to just be some kind of feral domestic cat the locals were getting mixed up with an actual unique wild cat and ignored it. The assumptions proved to be completely incorrect. The Eriomonte cat is a distinct subspecies of wild cat that is only found on that specific island. It is genetically isolated lineage going back to the ancient times and has its own biological identity. The cat hunts a wide range of prey and acts completely different than even feral cats. The people of the Eriomonte were correct in describing the cat as more spiritual and different from an ordinary cat. While it's not horrifying some of the other animals on this list, it is still considered a distinct cryptid that turned out to be true despite starting out as mainly folklore from the people of the island. Lastly, the most horrifying one of all, Bigfoot. No, I'm just kidding. He's still a myth and probably doesn't exist. But wouldn't that be crazy if he did? I mean, the Appalachian Mountains are a pretty big region. Maybe he could be running around somewhere deep in the forest at night. Probably not, but maybe. So those were all the cryptids that turned out to be real. While they may not be as terrifying as the folklore and stories make them out to be, it's still interesting to see how people talk about and explain animals they see, and how a little animal like a bat can turn into something as insane as a giant Jersey devil. Which one do you think turned out to be the most horrifying compared to the actual cryptid? Comment it below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hype the video. I'm trying to hit 10k subscribers, so everything helps. Later. Did you know sea animals have been documented in the past to have the ability to learn and mimic human speech? Fishermen have often reported throughout history hearing voices deep into the ocean, and maybe they were more real than people previously believed. I mean, mimicry is not an insanely unique thing in the animal world. You may even already know some animals that can mimic human speech. The most well-known animal for vocal mimicry is a parrot, with the smartest parrot, the African grey parrot, being able to learn up to 1,000 words and use them in context. These birds also sound very real, and in some cases the pronunciation is so good that it'd be hard to even tell it's a parrot parrot speaking. But that's just a bird sitting in a cage. The horrifying part comes to the fact that these aren't just parrots learning human speech. These animals are sea animals and mammals. Just imagine you're out on a trip at sea. Your other deckhands are fast asleep and you're on the bow. You hear the cry of someone asking for help. You desperately look at the water around you trying to find someone, only to see a giant mammal in the deep watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake so you can become its next meal. One of the most creepy mammals capable of mimicry is the orca. In 2018, a study made headlines when it found that a captive orca, also known as a killer whale, was able to imitate human speech. The killer whale, called Wiki, lived at the Marineland Aquarium in Antibes, France. Wiki was trained to produce some words such as hello, Amy, and 1, 2, 3. Wiki was also later found to be able to make even more sounds like a creaky door and the ability to imitate the call of an elephant. This makes sense as orcas are able to live by communicating over vast distances to know what environment's like, where to find each other, and where to find food. Here's real audio from the orca documenting the terrifying results the researchers learned from this experiment.
Amy! Ah! Amy! Ah! Hello? 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 1, 2.
Imagine hearing that deep into your ocean voyage. Not so fun fact, this has actually been known for decades by Japanese fishermen, especially those who worked the cold water off Hokkaido in the 1960s and 70s. At the time, orca hunting wasn't illegal and small coastal crews were often sent out to kill pods, blamed for depleting fish stocks. It was difficult and dirty work, but to most of the men it was just another part of surviving at sea. What stayed with many of them over the years wasn't the danger or even the violence itself, it was the sounds. More than one crew reported hearing noises that didn't sound like any animal they had ever known. Late at night when the boat engines were silent and the sea was calm, the orcas would let out long, uneven calls that drifted across the water like voices. Some fishermen said it sounded like women crying. Others described it as children calling from under the waves. Fathers on the crew, with kids waiting for them at home, said the sound stayed in their head long after the hunts were over. A few men refused to go back out on orca trips after that. They said it felt like killing something that understood far more than it should. Some of them lost their jobs because of it. One man, years later, told a local newspaper that even now, when he hears his daughter cry, it pulls him straight back to those nights at sea, listening to something in the dark trying to speak through the wrong kind of throat. Orcas have huge brains, 3.5 times larger than humans, and specifically have the most wrinkled neocortex of any animal brain on the planet, even more wrinkled than humans. The neocortex is involved with cognition, emotion, and memory and communication, meaning that these orcas could definitely know what they're doing when calling out to Japanese fishermen in the night, or trying to talk to their captors in captivity. Beluga whales have also shown the disturbing ability to mimic human speech. In 1989, a beluga whale named Nock at a US Navy research facility surprised divers by mimicking human speech. The whale was said to be so convincing that one diver heard a clear "get out" and surfaced, thinking a fellow diver was calling out to him. The beluga whale was able to produce the sound through its nasal passages, perfectly capturing the cadence and rhythm of human speech, showing how powerful a beluga whale's vocal flexibility and intelligence really is. This mimicry showed the complex communication skills a mammal can have for copying human speech. Following this horrifying incident, researchers began recording the whale's vocalizations and trained him to reproduce them on command, rewarding him every time he got a correct vocal sound. In 2012 study, it was documented that the whale learned these speech patterns to connect with its human handlers. Here's exactly what the handlers heard. What makes this worse is what happened after the formal study ended. Once the reward stopped and the recording sessions were over, Nock kept talking alone in his tank, with no one asking him to perform and no food being offered. The whale continued to produce these human-like sounds on his own. Researchers who walked past an enclosure late in the evening reported hearing low, muttering tones rising out of the water, sounds that had no obvious reason to exist. Belugas in the wild are sometimes called sea canaries because of how loud and constant their chatter is. They produce clicks, chirps, whistles, and squeals that bounce through the water in ways researchers still do not fully understand. But Nock was producing something that carried the shape of human language without carrying any of the meaning, and that distinction is one of the most deeply unsettling things a living creature can do. What it tells us is that Nock was studying human sound the way a child studies a language they want to learn. And the question that nobody has ever been able to answer is what exactly was he preparing for? The question then becomes whether it was trying to connect with human researchers or just trying to survive. A beluga in captivity has very few tools at its disposal. It can swim in circles and it can refuse to eat, or it can copy human noises. The idea that an animal figured that out on its own should give you a real pause. Because if a captive whale can learn to mimic human speech as a survival tool, what is stopping a wild beluga from doing the exact same thing? What would happen if a diver, alone in open water, heard a voice behind them telling them to swim towards something they couldn't see? This case established belugas as a highly intense and socially aware animal who are capable of learning and experimenting with sounds in ways that were previously thought to only be possible by humans. The last example is of a sea animal that is a little more close to the surface, seals. Seals are one of the other few non-human animals capable of vocal learning, with the most famous example being Hoover, a harbor seal who lived at the New England Aquarium in Boston from 1971 to 1985. He was rescued and raised by a fisherman, who raised him similar to a family dog, speaking to him constantly. Human absorbed his fisherman's thick New England accent and later learned to speak, saying phrases like, "Hello there," and "Get out of here and come over." Other listeners described him as sounding somewhat inebriated because he tended to slur words together, and aquarium workers described his voice as sounding like a male human with a Boston accent. Later, other studies were done and found that you could teach other seals to talk too by training them from a young age. Hearing the voice of a human from a non-human animal is very uncanny. What is more disturbing is that Hoover did not need to be rewarded to keep speaking. He just did. Long after the fisherman who raised him has handed him over to the aquarium, Hoover still called out. Maybe he was just looking for attention, or maybe he wanted something more. Researchers who studied Hoover later confirmed that his vocal learning was rooted in something real. Harbor seals have a physical structure in their throat that gives them a rare level of control over the sounds they produce, far more than most marine animals. The same flexibility that allows them to bark and grunt can, under the right conditions, be shaped into something that sounds like words. What that means is that Hoover was working with raw materials that were already close to human. He just had to close the gap, and he did. The deeper you look at all these animals, the harder it becomes to write any of this as a coincidence or a party trick. Orcas that call out like crying women off the coast of Japan, a beluga that kept speaking long after it had any reason to do so, a seal that sounded like a fisherman. These animals were all learning that human sounds get a very human reaction, and they were using that knowledge. The ocean's enormous, and the vast majority have never been recorded, heard, or even seen. Whatever is down there has millions of years to listen to us. The sounds you heard were all caught in controlled setting by people who are looking for them. What nobody can tell you is how many times those same sounds is drifting up from the deep water in the middle of the ocean. What other creatures and monsters exist that are capable of repeating human voices? Fishermen have often reported hearing voices out at sea, voices in places where it'd be almost impossible for any humans to be or survive. Sure, those voices could be due to whale noises or just fishermen going insane, or it could be coming from another animal humans have not yet come into contact with, an animal we may never know is making those noises, or why. Did you know dinosaurs were monsters? Well, not really, they were just animals. Despite that, some dinosaurs had absolutely psychopathic eating habits. In order to survive the Cretaceous period, the creatures that were alive had to adapt or be left behind. Dinosaurs literally ruled the planet for over 165 million years, meaning iteration after iteration, each generation of dinosaur evolved to be stronger than the last, leaving all the weakest dinosaurs to die or starve. If a dinosaur even had a chance to survive, it sometimes had to change what it considered food in the moment. Dinosaurs were forced to switch from herbivores to carnivores, grow rows of teeth like a lawnmower, or even cannibalize their own offsprings in order to survive. The Mesozoic era was no joke. By the end, the only dinosaurs that were still alive had millions of years to become the most deadly and horrifying or just straight up resourceful. Before I get into it, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and if you really enjoy the content and you're on mobile, please hype because it helps a ton. One of the most disturbing examples of bizarre eating methods is the Majungasaurus. The Majungasaurus was a medium-sized stocky dinosaur with a bighorn head and almost useless arms. It lived in the late Cretaceous period in Madagascar 70 million years ago and was roughly 7 meters long. The weapon that allowed Majungasaurus to be deadly was a strong bite, built for hanging on to struggling prey rather than quickly pursuing it like other dinosaurs. But what made this dinosaur more horrifying than just a strong bite was its eating habits. The Majungasaurus was one of the only dinosaurs where cannibalism was directly confirmed from fossils. Paleontologists have found Majungasaurus bones covered in tooth marks. The disturbing part is that these aren't just any tooth marks. These tooth marks have the same serration pattern, spacing, and size as other Majungasaurus teeth. The bite marks were also found on multiple bones with no signs of healing, meaning that the bites were made shortly after the animal was killed or during its death, not while it was alive. The one thing stopping this dinosaur from being truly horrifying is how unclear the extent of its cannibalism was. The fossils tell us that Majungasaurus could be a cannibal, but not that it always hunted its own kind. Many modern large predators like big cats or crocodiles will scavenge or occasionally kill members of their own species in times of intense stress or competition, so Majungasaurus likely behaved similar to those animals. The T-Rex also had its secrets that not many people know about. When most people think of how the T-Rex fed, they imagine the fast attacks and quick strikes, using its jaw to overpower its prey until it wins. The T-Rex does have the most powerful bite force of any dinosaur of its time or even any land predator ever, but many studies suggest a different style of hunting, marked by a crippling bite and a slow death. Honestly, the T-Rex probably didn't have an instant kill bite. Instead, it likely maimed its victims and then followed them as they died, waiting until the dinosaur was completely weakened before finishing it off. This makes the T-Rex more similar to a great white shark than than a quick one and done killer. I mean, have you ever wondered why the T-Rex had such short arms? While there's many different theories as to why, one serious hypothesis is that when T-Rex fed during group frenzies, the shorter arms lowered the risk of them getting ripped off. If we go a little smaller and back to North America, we can find one of the creepiest methods of ending the life of its prey, and that came from the Allosaurus with its chainsaw-like method. The Allosaurus was a large meat-eating theropod dinosaur from the late Jurassic period. Paleontologists consider it the top predator in its North American ecosystem. It lived about 155 million years ago and was around 26 to 32 feet long. The name Allosaurus actually means different lizard, which kind of makes you wonder what other lizards they were looking at because this thing looks nothing like a lizard. The Allosaurus mainly preyed on large herbivores such as the Stegosaurus and other long-necked sauropods. When it struck, its biomechanics showed the dinosaur would not just bite down with as much force as possible like a T-Rex. Instead, it likely uses teeth in a hatchet or machete-style attack, swinging its head and pulling back and forth to tear big chunks of meat out of its prey. This is more similar to a modern-day hawk than the bone-crushing T-Rex. Some researchers even believe it may have been a flesh grazer, meaning it would bite and rip flesh from large animals without always killing them outright. This would allow the prey to survive the initial attack, leaving the animal or dinosaur to suffer as it tried to survive after losing literal chunks of flesh. There's also evidence that the Allosaurus may have been hunted and at least fed in groups. Just imagine a sauropod minding its own business, only to have a group of Allosauruses run up to it, ripping out its flesh one piece at a time, each dinosaur acting like its own individual chainsaw. The sauropod would not have been able to do anything except watch as it slowly gets whittled down to nothing. It was literally a dino eats dino world. But that's not all the terrifying feeding strategies that came from these massive predators. Some of the most disturbing behaviors came from smaller dinosaurs. Take the velociraptor. In movies and television, you often see these dinosaurs as just smaller versions of a T-Rex, relying mainly on their bite to nibble and shear at prey, allowing them to weaken whenever they were attacking until they could eat. The thing that made the velociraptor scary in movies was the fact that they were always in a group and they hunted together. In real life, the truth was way more weird. The velociraptor relied both on its speed and precision, with its most iconic feature being a large, sickle-shaped claw on each foot. Most people believed it was used to slash at other dinosaurs, when in reality, scientists theorized that the dinosaur would hold its victim down in place, then use its talon to shear its prey piece by piece, similar to modern birds like hawks or eagles, which do a similar thing, pinning down other animals and beginning to eat the prey before it's even dead. The popular Spinosaurus also shows a horrifying example of what it took to survive the Mesozoic era. Spinosaurus was one of the largest predators ever, allowing it to use its size to dominate other dinosaurs. Unlike other theropods, the Spinosaurus spent most of its time in water, in regions like swamps and rivers. It had a long crocodile-like snout filled with conical teeth that were designed for gripping slippery prey. Compared to movies where the dinosaur is shown as a bloodthirsty monster, in real life the Spinosaurus hunted mainly fish. But when it didn't hunt fish or was forced to hunt other prey, things take a turn from normal to horrifying. The Spinosaurus likely had the ability to grab prey with its conical teeth and drag it into the river, drowning it, similar to the way a modern-day crocodile waits at the edge for its victim before grabbing it with its jaws and dragging it under. This left the prey ambushed, confused, and underwater before it even realized what happened. The tight grip also meant that it could violently shake its prey until it literally shook it apart. There's also evidence that the Spinosaurus would seek out common water edges where dinosaurs would drink. Imagine just being a dinosaur coming down for what you think is a safe drink, only to be dragged underwater by a massive predator 3 times your size that had adapted for millions of years specifically to not let you escape. Even herbivores were not safe from disturbing adaptations to survive the harsh conditions of the time period. Some plant-eating dinosaurs had to develop extreme feeding strategies to make it another day. The hadrosaurs had hundreds of tightly packed teeth forming what is known as a dental battery. If you have tryphobia, you may want to look away from any of these pictures. Because all the teeth were packed together like that, they would constantly be self-sharpening as they ground against surfaces, sort of similar to a food processor. Whenever a tooth was worn down, a new one would immediately replace it from underneath. This adaptation allowed these dinosaurs to eat tough, fibrous plants other animals couldn't. While it may not have been directly violent, the idea of a mouth filled with hundreds of constantly replacing teeth is horrifying. Teeth constantly being ground down just to be replaced by another layer. Imagine how dangerous those teeth could have been if the dinosaur was ever forced to eat something other than just plants. The strength could have definitely done some damage if it needed to move from plants to actual prey. Parasites add another layer of horror to the many other dinosaur feeding habits. While direct evidence of dinosaurs being affected by parasites are rare, we can look to modern day organisms to get an idea idea of what likely existed during the time of dinosaurs. One of the most horrifying examples is the fungi Ophicordyceps, often called the zombie ant fungus. This parasite infects ants, then completely takes over their bodies and brains. It forces the ant to climb higher and higher, controlling it like a zombie, with the ant losing any of its previous autonomy. Once the ant gets as high as it can go, the fungus literally bursts out of the ant's body and releases spores into the air, which then float to find the next victim and repeat the cycle. While this fungus specifically targets ants today, it is not too far-fetched to say there could have been a similar parasitic relationship during the age of the dinosaurs. You could even imagine prehistoric parasites manipulating the behavior of entire dinosaurs or other creatures, turning them into living hosts to spread as far as possible. The idea that an animal could lose control of its own body and then be used as a tool for a parasite to spread is one of the most disturbing feeding strategies in all of nature, and it exists today. Another disturbing adaptation during this time was the relationship dinosaurs had with bones. In prehistoric times, any calorie or nutrient was a major advantage for survival. This meant that some dinosaurs specialized in bone eating, a behavior called osteophagy. Eating bones would give dinosaurs extra calcium and phosphorus along with bone marrow, which is low-key pretty good, which provided additional energy. Many fossils show crust bones and teeth that indicated species regularly bit deeply into skeletons rather than just stripping flesh off the bone. The T-Rex would do this often. With its huge jaw muscles and robust teeth, it would finally fragment bones and extract every last bit of marrow and minerals, giving it the energy it needed to survive and reinforcing its status as one of the most dominant predators. There are even hints of herbivores doing something similar, with dinosaurs such as the Lusotitan occasionally chewing bones to get extra calcium. Most bone chewing was reserved for the biggest and strongest dinosaurs, as smaller ones didn't have the strength to break them. In the Mesozoic era, nothing went to waste, as any calorie could be the difference between survival and perishing. In the end, all these feeding strategies are reminders that dinosaurs were not movie monsters. They were real animals just trying to survive. Every horrible bite, claw, and tooth was the result of millions of years of evolution, fine-tuning them to squeeze every last calorie out of their environment. Dinosaurs were just trying to live like any other animal on the planet. Did you know scientists are working on bringing back extinct animals and the results are horrifying? Across a group of different labs and research facilities, scientists have been working on splicing DNA together to bring back animals that went extinct thousands of years ago. Scientists have already created literal living direwolves, and that's only the start. There are currently at least 9 extinct species being worked on across different labs. These labs have massive amounts of funding, real DNA, and in some cases have already created living animals. Other labs are still years away from reviving the animal of their chosen species, but even their research and science is close by. Today I'm going to be talking about 9 of the most disturbing extinct animals scientists are actually bringing back right now. Let's start with one of the most famous extinct animals, the direwolf. The direwolf died out around 10,000 years ago and was wiped out at the end of the last ice age. The direwolf is literally the same size as a normal wolf, except it's better in every way, with a stronger bite force and stockier limbs. In 2025, a company called Colossal Bioscience announced something that people thought was impossible. The company had created 3 wolf pups with the name Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. These wolves have been created using 20 separate gene edits made to the gray wolf DNA. The team pulled genetic information from ancient direwolf fossils and then used that to figure out which traits to use. They then focused on copying things like the size, jaw structure, coat, and color to recreate the direwolf in a living animal. These wolves are actually still alive today. All these wolves grew up in a protected large habitat and now look very similar to what paleontologists have estimated direwolves to have looked like. It's horrifying and amazing to think scientists have been able to revive these animals, though it all comes with a huge caveat. These animals aren't true direwolves. Instead, these animals are genetically modified gray wolves fit to match direwolves. Still, this is the furthest any de-extinction project has gotten, with literal living animals that breathe and walk. The next animal is what started the entire movement to unextinct animals, the woolly mammoth. This animal is one of the most specialized for the Ice Age, being designed for the cold, yet it went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago on the mainland due to hunting and rising temperatures. Colossal Biosciences announced they planned to try to bring the woolly mammoth back. The researchers' idea is to edit Asian elephant embryos with mammoth genes taken from frozen woolly mammoth specimens found in the Siberian permafrost. While technology doesn't let scientists create an exact clone of the woolly mammoth, scientists are instead aiming to create an elephant with mammoth-like traits such as a thick wool coat, smaller ears, better cold acclimatization, and extra fat layers. All this would allow the revived extinct animal to survive in cold temperatures similar to how woolly mammoths used to do it. The company's goal is to have the first mammoth calves born by 2028. Currently, researchers are already using gene editing tools to create elephant cells in their lab, with the final goal to recreate the woolly mammoth and release it in the Arctic tundra. Large animals rolling the tundra could help break up packed snow, which creates holes in the ground. These holes would allow the ground underneath the permafrost to get extra cold and frozen, because you don't want permafrost to thaw because it emits huge amounts of carbon dioxide, making woolly mammoths really good for the environment long term. But to be honest though, I think the main reason they're doing it is because it would just be really cool to have these animals back. Next is the thylacine, known as the Tasmanian tiger. This horrifying animal went extinct in 1936, with the last known individual dying in the Hobart Zoo. What makes this different from other extinction projects is where the researchers got the DNA source. Researchers were able to get access to genetic material that's over 100 years old. This DNA came directly from preserved specimens such as a 108-year-old pouch young preserved in alcohol at the Museum Victoria in Melbourne, teeth from other museum collections, and a 130-year-old dried skin and muscle tissue sample housed at the Swedish Museum of Natural History. Researchers are then comparing this DNA to a small marsupial called the fat-tailed dunnards, which has a high amount of genetic overlap with the thylacine, despite looking nothing alike. The dunnard is then going to be used as a gene template, with scientists using it as a stand-in species to edit genomes until they get closer to the traits of a Tasmanian tiger. The leaders of this project, Australia, are more invested in this project than a typical country because the reason for its extinction was overhunting done by the government's bounty programs compared to normal, natural causes. Now it's for the most horrifying animal ever attempted to be revived, the dodo. The dodo disappeared within a century of humans arriving on Mauritius in 1665, with most of the extinction being due to predators that ate the dodo's eggs and humans hunting them. The dodo also literally had zero fears of humans. Sailors said you could walk right up to them and pet them since they had no predator instincts towards us. The de-extinction process relies on the pigeon family. Dodos are part of the pigeon and dove lineage. This is despite dodos being flightless birds and how strange they look. Scientists have been extracting and sequencing dodo DNA from museum specimens and comparing it to living pigeons. There, they identify what the key genes were that control things like the size and flightlessness of dodos. Researchers have even reportedly made progress developing primordial germ cells from pigeons. The goal is to then take these dodo pigeon cells and then find a related bird species surrogate to hatch a dodo. The problem is bird embryology takes a lot more time and work than mammals, with the date for actually bringing back dodos still being very far away. Next is the giant moa. The giant moa was a massive flightless bird native to New Zealand, with some species be able to grow taller than a human. The moa is believed to have gone extinct a few centuries ago due to overhunting. The project's gotten a lot of press over the funding for it, with filmmaker Peter Jackson, the director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, backing the New Zealand-based effort to bring the moa back. The goal is to use a mix of birds like the tinamou and emu genetics as references. Currently though, the work is in very early stages of research and nowhere near close to the direwolf project mentioned earlier. Right now, researchers are focused on sequencing the moa genomes from bone material and figuring out how the moa relates to different bird species specifically. The problem comes with the fact that there are multiple moa species, meaning the family tree isn't fully mapped out yet. Next we go to one of the least known animals, but one that might have the most realistic timeline out of any of these experiments. The bluebuck was a South African antelope that was hunted to extinction sometime in the early 1800s. The extinction was literally caused by European colonization and hunting in Africa, being one of the first documented mammal extinctions due to this. Colossal Biosciences announced in April 2026 that they were going to focus on this animal outside their normal Ice Age related projects. The plan involves using the roan antelope as a genetic base since it's one of the closest living relatives. Antelope reproduction and breeding are already very well understood, with decades of conservation work with other African species that would give the researchers a huge head start. Researchers on the project estimated they could get the project done very quickly, despite it having far less media attention than mammoths and direwolves. The story of the Pyrenean ibex, also called the bucardo, is honestly one of the saddest moments in de-extinction history. Over 20 years ago, the last known wild bucardo, named Celia, died when a falling tree crushed her in 2000. Before the bucardo died, scientists managed to preserve some of the bucardo's cells. In 2003, researchers then used those preserved cells to create a cloned bucardo kid. This made the clone the first extinct animal ever brought back to life. Even more sadly though, the clone was born with a severe lung defect and died just minutes after birth. The scientists managed to clone an entire extinct species, but it goes to show how hard the science really is. Even after bringing the animal back to life, they sadly could not keep it alive or guarantee a successful outcome. Next we go to the northern white rhino. While this animal isn't technically extinct yet, it is about as close as an animal could be while still being alive. Currently there are only 2 of these creatures left on the entire planet. Both of the rhinos, named Najin and Fatu, are female and live under constant protection at a conservatory in Kenya. Due to the old age and health of these 2 animals, neither one of them can have more rhinos or carry a pregnancy. Any natural reproduction for the species is entirely over. Scientists at an organization called BioRescue have been working diligently to change that with a different approach entirely. The researchers have been collecting eggs from the 2 remaining females and combining them with resources from male northern white rhinos that died years ago. This combination has allowed them to create embryos in a lab setting. The plan is then to implant those embryos into a southern white rhino surrogate. As the southern white rhino is so close to the northern white rhino, it may make reproduction possible. The research is very hopeful too, with the researchers aiming for a real pregnancy within the next year or two. And if this works out, that would mean extinction of this animal would be ended. Though this all is very intense, as it's basically just a race against extinction happening in real time. If the scientists fail now, especially after the white rhinos die, we may never be able to bring the northern white rhino back again, making just another animal lost to time. Last is the humble pigeon. Everyone's probably seen or at least heard of a pigeon unless you've never left your house, though one pigeon people haven't seen is the passenger pigeon. The passenger pigeon was at one point the most numerous bird species on the entire planet. Some people even say that there were so many at a time that the sky could turn black for hours with just pigeons. In the 1800s, that changed with mass hunting and habitat destruction occurring, wiping out literally billions of them just over a few decades. The last known individual bird, named Martha, died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. Researchers since then have been working to bring the animal back from extinction alongside the dodo. Both the Dodo Project and the Pigeon Project involve solving similar problems around the topics and research of bird genetics and reproduction. The closest living relative that can make the cloning possible is the band-tailed pigeon, but progress just like with the dodo has been extremely slow, as cloning a bird is much harder than cloning mammals. Mammals just have significantly more research in genetic engineering techniques than cloning. The research is still ongoing for this project, but the timeline is also very uncertain. So here you have it, 9 animals that scientists are actually bringing back from extinction right now. And honestly, some of these are way closer to happening than you think. These range from some simple animals and birds like the dodo and passenger pigeon to animals many people say are horrifying to see in real life, such as the direwolf and woolly mammoth. The field is moving fast, and it would be so amazing to see these animals come back to life. Comment which animal you would like to see most come back from extinction, and if you like this video, subscribe. Did you know there are full animals preserved exactly as the way they were, frozen from tens of thousands of years ago, that we have found? There's something deeply disturbing about being able to look at a dead animal and still count its eyelashes thousands of years later. Most creatures that die leave behind some bones at best, and maybe a faint impression of some stone if they were lucky. But most animals don't even get that mercy, with the earth breaking down the creatures so quickly it doesn't even get a chance to rot. The Earth's frost does something different though. Instead of the animal rotting like it normally would, or being eaten by bugs, it's completely frozen in time, held solid in the exact position the animal experienced its final moments in. The animal waits thousands of years and sometimes even tens of thousands until the ground shifts or a miner randomly blasts through a wall of rock and it's found, leading to a disturbing discovery of an animal that no longer exists from a time that is long gone. Right now frozen beneath the permafrost of Siberia, deep in Canada's riverbeds, and locked inside amber that are millions of years old, are the bodies of animals and creatures that used to exist. These animals are completely intact with all their flesh, fur, organs, and sometimes even the blood from when they first got trapped. Today we're looking at 6 prehistoric animals frozen completely in time and the details of what the scientists who found them saw when they were finally dug up, which were generally unsettling. In the summer of 2016, a gold miner in Canada's Yukon Territory was blasting through a frozen wall with a high-pressure water hose when he noticed something starting to melt out of the ice. It was not gold or anything normal you would expect to find. Instead, it was a wolf pup, and she was so perfectly preserved that when scientists got their hands on her, they could still see the papilla on her small tongue. The wolf pup was named Zur, meaning wolf based on the language of the people local to the area. She had been locked in permafrost for over 57,000 years. The pup was only 7 weeks old when she died, and her body was so fragile it was still only in an early stage of puppyhood. Her face was almost indistinguishable from a modern wolf pup's, despite dying thousands of years ago. Every part of her was intact from her fur to her eyes. Scientists then ran a series of x-rays, sampled her DNA, and studied her isotope levels. And what they found only made things stranger. Her diet was found to be almost entirely aquatic. Zur had been eating almost completely fish instead of the usual bison or deer, which was extremely unusual for any wolf in that time or region. To this day, scientists don't entirely know why a 7-week-old pup raised in the Yukon was surviving almost entirely on fish, how she died in the first place, or why she was ever frozen solid for over 57,000 years. Today, Zur is the most complete Ice Age wolf ever recorded, and she's so small she literally fits into the palm of your hand. In 2014, a man named Alexander Banderov was sailing past a ravine in Siberia when he noticed something hanging out of the ice above him. He assumed it was something normal to the area like a reindeer carcass. He pulled over his boat and walked closer to get a better look. What slowly fell out of the frozen bank was something he didn't recognize at all, and it was deeply disturbing. What landed at his feet was a baby woolly rhinoceros that had been there for roughly 34,000 years. Scientists decided to name the specimen Sasha after Alexander, which turned out to be a fitting name since despite countless attempts and in-depth analyses, research still cannot determine whether Sasha was male or female. What scientists did discover is that the rhino was around 7 months old at the time of death and already almost 5 feet long, literally being bigger at 7 months than a modern African rhino would be at a year and a half. When scientists prepared the animal for analysis, they expected its fur to be completely dull and degraded. Instead, they found the woolly rhino's coat was still thick, soft, and fully intact, down to the dense, insulating undercoat still there beneath the long guard hairs. The texture and surface also confirmed what scientists had long predicted about the species, but no one before this had actually seen a woolly rhinoceros well enough to prove it. This baby woolly rhino was the first one ever found anywhere in the world. Scientists also found the rhino's eye, ear, nostrils, and lips intact, making Sasha the first and only baby woolly rhino in history to have ever been seen by humans. Looking at the photos of her gives a real glimpse into a creature that used to be everywhere on Earth. Next is Yuka, a woolly mammoth that was between 6 and 9 years old when she died, around 39,000 years ago on what is now the Arctic coast of Siberia. The leading theory is that she probably fell into a lake or got stuck in a swamp and couldn't pull herself out. When she was recovered from the ice, her fur, trunk, tongue tissue, and much of her soft anatomy were still intact. Researchers then found something even more terrifying on her hide, cut marks that were made by what seemed to be human hands. This meant prehistoric humans had probably butchered this animal 39,000 years ago and left the evidence etched onto her skin, making Yuka not just one of the best preserved mammoths ever found on Earth, but also one of the earliest known pieces of evidence of humans in the Arctic. But the cut marks weren't the most disturbing thing scientists found. When scientists pressed into Yuka's tissue during examination, blood came flowing out. Scientists literally had dark red blood coming out of an animal that had been frozen for 39,000 years. This was the first time in recorded human history anyone's ever retrieved flowing blood from a woolly mammoth. Researchers believe the circulating blood may have contained a version of a biological antifreeze that prevented the blood from fully crystallizing, an adaptation that likely allowed the mammoths to survive the brutal Arctic winters of the time. The cell nuclei in the blood even showed signs of biological activity, meaning Yuka isn't just a fossil or preserved body, she could be something scientists might one day actually clone and bring back to life. We could literally have a woolly mammoth existing again today if scientists put technology just a little further with samples like these. In 2016, paleontologists working in the Yakutia region of Siberia found 2 cave lions buried 7 meters underground, just a few meters apart from each other. These cubs have been there for around 12,000 years. They were frozen so quickly that their whiskers were still attached and their fur was still intact. Scientists could even count the individual toes on each paw to make the shape of the cubs' faces. The cubs were later named Yuan and Dina after the nearby Uyadina River. Both cubs were estimated to be only 2 weeks old when they died. Their eyes literally hadn't even opened yet and they still had baby teeth developing inside their gums. The leading theory is that a landslide collapsed on the den while the mother was out hunting, sealing both the cubs inside before she could save them. The preservation was so remarkable that researchers spent years just trying to determine whether any residue of the mother's milk still remained inside the cubs' stomachs. Cave lions were absolutely enormous animals, significantly larger than modern African lions. They were literal apex predators of their time, ruling across Europe and Siberia during the Ice Age with no natural enemies. These lions sat at the top of the food chain, and it's insane to think scientists discovered 2 frozen cubs that now rest in their lab freezer. They literally look like they just fell asleep a couple hours ago, when in reality they've been dead for thousands of years. In 2011, a heavy equipment operator named Sean Funk was working at an excavator at an oil mine in Alberta, Canada, when his machine scraped against an object that wasn't a rock. The object was extracted over several weeks of careful manual labor, and what came out of the ground was a 110 million year old armored dinosaur that looked less like a fossil and more like something that had died yesterday. The dinosaur was a nodosaur, a massive heavily armored herbivore covered in plates and spikes. What the miners had discovered is considered the most well-preserved large dinosaur specimen ever found, and it's not even close. The actual skin was literally still there and sitting on top of the armor plating. A team of specialists then spent over 7,000 hours across multiple years carefully preparing the animal for study. After analyzing the pigment found in the preserved skin, paleontologists discovered that the Borealia pelta had a reddish-brown coloration on its upper body. This color may have acted as a camouflage, even though the animal probably didn't need to give it its armor. The camouflage may have helped break up its silhouette as it moved. The fact that a dinosaur covered in armor and spikes still needs camouflage says a lot of how dangerous and deadly the Cretaceous period really was. Scientists then looked into its stomach and were able to examine the contents of its final meal, which turned out to be almost entirely soft fern fronds. The leading theory is that the dinosaur drowned in a river. Due to its large size, the body then floated intact until it reached the Western Seaway, before slowly sinking to the ocean floor, where sediment buried and preserved it. It might not have been frozen, but it was preserved remarkably well, sitting in rock for over 110 million years. In 2018, a researcher named Antasia Saksovich was working in a lab with ancient soil samples pulled from the Siberian permafrost 16 years earlier. The samples came from a fossilized squirrel burrow that scientists had found buried 40 meters below the Arctic surface. When she added water to the frozen sediment in her lab, something disturbing happened. It moved. The thawed soil contained microscopic roundworms and nematodes that had been frozen solid for 46,000 years. The worms had been in a state of cryptobiosis for over 46,000 of those years. They entered the state during the Pleistocene epoch, when woolly mammoths were still alive and modern humans had only just begun exploring Africa. They stayed frozen and motionless for 46,000 years until Antasia added water in 2018 and accidentally woke them up. Within hours, the worms were eating, and soon after they were cloning themselves, since this kind of worm doesn't need a mate to reproduce. The species was completely unknown to researchers before then. These worms had been frozen for over 10,000 years, only to resume living with apparently no negative side effects. The species was named Panerolemus collimaensis. Luckily, they weren't some kind of ancient parasite or dangerous pathogen, but it makes you wonder what other creatures might be frozen deep in the earth waiting to thaw out. Scientists to this day can't even answer that question. What else is out there right now frozen in a permafrost waiting to rejoin the world? With permafrost melting and global temperatures climbing every decade, new animals and worms will keep resurfacing and hopefully they'll be friendly. Did you know everything you've heard about the saber-tooth tiger is wrong and the truth is way more disturbing? Most people know the saber-tooth tiger from popular media, thinking the saber-tooth tiger was just a modern-day tiger with bigger teeth and maybe a bit more attitude. The real-life saber-tooth tiger, also known as a smilodon, was a lot more horrifying, more akin to a modern-day monster. Even calling a smilodon a tiger doesn't do it justice, as it wasn't even remotely connected to modern tigers or lions. The smilodon actually belonged to a completely extinct group of cats called Machaerodontidae. You have to imagine the smilodon is less of a tiger and more of an entirely different experimental type of prehistoric predator. Scientists actually believe the lineage diverged from our modern cuddly cat friends, like this little guy here, about 20 million years ago. To give some perspective, calling a smilodon related to cats would be like saying humans are the same as a very advanced kind of fish. Even the teeth of the smilodon have a completely different, more horrifying use than you think. The terrifying part is we don't always know the depths of the smilodon's strength. The animal behind the saber-tooth tiger myth first came up in the 1800s. In the 1830s, fossils were discovered in Brazilian caves, and then in 1842, the Danish naturalist Peter Wilhelm Lund officially named the genus Smilodon. If you manage to actually see one in real life, the first thing you would notice is how completely wrong and eerie it looks compared to any cartoon or even your own preconceived imagination. The Smilodon didn't have a sleek or agile body that was built for chasing prey. Instead, the Smilodon was stocky and heavy, with limbs that were extremely thick and powerful, more akin to a bear than something quick like the cheetah. The Smilodon evolved for one single reason: to grab onto any prey at once, hold it down, and overpower it with its pure strength to get its next meal. Its front limbs literally showed it, being especially massive compared to other living cats. Any escape for something wrapped around its limbs would be impossible. Most people think the Smilodon would chase down fleeing animals across ice or grassland, when in reality the Smilodon probably waited and ambushed its prey, where it would jump so close to you so quickly speed didn't matter and strength was the only thing that determined the survivor. And then there's the teeth. The saber-tooth tiger's most iconic feature are his large saber-tooth teeth sticking out of his face. These teeth could reach up to 7 inches in length and acted as a literal knife sticking straight out of the saber-tooth's face. When people imagine them, they think the teeth acted as his main killing device, with the predator basically just biting down on its victim and crushing it. That fact is wrong. The teeth were actually surprisingly fragile if they were used in the wrong way. The Smilodon's teeth acted more like blades than conical spikes like a tiger or other cats. If the Smilodon just tried to bite directly into the bones or other hard objects, the teeth would literally shatter, which makes them sound pretty useless to be honest, if they couldn't even be used for strikes. Why would evolution give the predator such a dramatic huge weapon on its mouth only for it to be breakable and weak? Well, the way the Smilodon actually used its teeth was deeply unsettling. Instead of just relying on his bite strength to end prey like a T-Rex, the Smilodon used it more as a precision device. At first, the Smilodon would use his powerful forelimbs to completely stop and immobilize the prey. Then once the animal was pinned down and unable to fight back, the Smilodon would carefully position its prey and then use the long teeth to slice into the soft tissue of the animal, making sure to aim his teeth in the more vulnerable areas where any cut could be deadly, like a disturbing surgeon. Most scientists agree it mainly targeted the throat or the underside of the body where major blood vessels are. The Smilodon always aimed to create deep incisions and sever arteries, making the prey bleed out. This is completely different from any modern big cat today. Lions and tigers usually just go for a suffocating bite on the throat or muzzle of its prey, squeezing down on whatever animal it had trapped until it can't breathe, which is scary in its own right, but not nearly as horrifying as the Smilodon. Imagine what it was like being a large herbivore in the Ice Age, like a bison or a young mammoth. You're just minding your own business, walking around woodland and pockets of grass, then bam, out of nowhere a massive weight slams into you, sending you into the ground. You look up only to be pinned down to the ground by a Smilodon with arms way stronger than yours. You just have to sit there and watch as the Smilodon opens his mouth and aims his teeth, slowly setting up then pushing his teeth into your vital arteries until you can no longer fight back and there's nothing you can do about it. You just became another victim of one of Earth's most deadly predators. What if we now go to modern day Los Angeles for a second, and more specifically the La Brea tar pits. The sticky asphalt of the tar pit has actually trapped animals for tens of thousands of years that wandered in and got stuck, with many of the fossils being predators that came in following already struggling prey just to get stuck themselves. layers, which then added themselves to all the layers in the tar pit. This is where it gets scary again. Paleontologists over the years have pulled out thousands of Smilodon fossils from the pit, with the Smilodon fatalis being one of the most common large animals at La Brea, with more than 2,000 individual Smilodon fossils being found. As paleontologists look at these fossils, they found a common pattern. Many of the bones had signs of intense trauma with broken legs, damaged spines, or literal crushed skulls. The thing that would make you pause is that many of these injuries were the ones that healed. The bones showed that the Smilodon survived for many months or even years after suffering from these wounds. These wounds would have made traditional hunting nearly impossible, which doesn't make sense because the Smilodon would have needed to rest for the damaged bones and joints to fix themselves, on top of the fact that they were also carnivores, so they needed to continuously hunt to stay alive. This led some researchers to come up with a disturbing possibility. The Smilodon may have not been completely solitary animals like people believe. Smilodons may have been supported by other Smilodons in groups, meaning that they lived in groups. They probably also hunted in groups. In the prehistoric times, there's a chance you could literally run into a pack of Smilodons, each one with the ability and strength to ambush and hold down his prey, and the teeth to have a precision bite that could easily end it. For all we know, the Smilodon could have circled animals, with some of the Smilodons holding down the prey, while the other ones went in for a final strike with their sharp teeth. The Smilodon was also not limited to a small area. While it's very popular in California, and more specifically in Los Angeles, with LA designating specifically the Smilodon fatalis as the state fossil in 1974, the Smilodon has literally been seen all over the country, from places like Texas and California, all the way to Alberta, Canada, and down in South America, with its even bigger cousin called Smilodon populator being found in the open grasslands of South America, hunting mainly giant sloths in Manrauquia. For a very long time, the Smilodon was a very successful apex predator that dominated during its time period. The Smilodon lived from about 400,000 years ago until roughly 11,000 years ago, overlapping with some of the early humans in the Americas. It was one of the largest and most terrifying predators in its specific ecosystem, but then it went extinct. Around the end of the final ice age, many of the large animals that the Smilodon specifically hunted disappeared, with mammoths, giant ground sloths, and large camels dwindling in numbers. As the climate changed and reached its habitats and early humans began spreading, hunting the same prey became impossible. Since the Smilodon specialized in taking down big, heavy animals in close quarters, when all those animals started to vanish, the Smilodon was forced to die off too. It was just too specialized for its time period and could not switch to smaller animals, leaving it to slowly whittle away and starve. The Smilodon was also just a completely different animal than anything that exists today. While many people try to categorize it with cats like today's tigers or lions, it doesn't fit comfortably with any of those creatures. It's a disservice to the saber-tooth tiger to simply say it's a tiger with fangs. It was an animal that strictly evolved to be the apex predator of its own environment, and through evolution, it was designed to survive in the Ice Age, using its strength to hold down the bigger animals at the time, and then using its fangs to precisely cut into the most vulnerable parts of its prey. Movies like the Ice Age soften its image and turn it into a grumpy, slightly evil but lovable side character. They humanize it so it seems like some kind of moody cat with bigger than normal teeth, while in reality the Smilodon had none of these qualities. Instead, it would have been a dark shadow waiting behind a bush or behind a tree, watching and waiting for its next victim before jumping out of the bush. It was an animal that could take down prey much bigger than itself with just its muscles. I'm honestly surprised how humans could even compete with it at the time. It goes to show how powerful humans really are. There was a point when our ancestors may have run into a single Smilodon, or even worse, a pack of them, and had to fight them to survive. The real saber-tooth tiger wasn't just a fast tiger or lion with fangs. It was evolution's literal perfect killer, with every part of it adapted for the Ice Age's harsh conditions. It was an animal perfected for a specific situation and then completely erased by time, which is honestly probably a good thing, because I don't think bear spray would work on this thing if it still existed and you ran into one while you were camping. Check out this picture of a spider. At first you think that's not really disturbing. It's just a cellar spider that's been frozen or something. But what actually has been happening is 1,000 times more horrifying. This spider isn't frozen. Instead, it's been taken over by a parasitic zombie fungus. The fungus took over the spider's body and brain, forced the spider to do a series of things, and then when the host wasn't needed, it ate the spider from the inside out, leaving behind this white shell of what used to be a spider, and spreading to the next one. This is the horrifying, disturbing world of parasites and fungi. As I've researched dinosaurs over the years and other animals, one thing I kept finding was the parasites and fungi that can attach to them. While zombies like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us aren't real yet, when you look at other animals outside of humans, you start to see human zombies are closer to reality than we think. Especially when you look at insects, where there are literal exact types of fungi that are able to control the brain of these insects, effectively turning them into The Walking Dead. Today I wanted to show you and teach you about some of the most terrifying fungi and parasites that affect insects I could find. And maybe I'll throw in some that have even gone as far as to infect dinosaurs. No human parasites though, those freak even me out a little too much. Let's start strong for what I consider the creepiest fungus to ever exist, Ophiocordyceps, a genus of fungi first scientifically described by British mycologist Tom Petch in 1931. This fungus has around 140 different species that grow primarily in insects. I personally believe this fungus most closely matches the Last of Us fungus. Some even say The Last of Us was based on what would happen if this exact fungus evolved to affect humans. Luckily, this fungus isn't able to due to our high internal body temperatures. Ophiocordyceps unilaterus starts its parasitic life by lying on the ground. These spores are usually pretty sticky, allowing them to stay on the forest floor or on an insect. Then an unsuspecting carpenter ant walks by and the spore sticks onto the ant's exoskeleton. Once inside, the fungus first exists as a bunch of single cells circulating the ant's body fluids. It finds the air of the ant where nutrients are distributed and steals nutrients from the ant to grow. Over the following days to weeks, fungal cells spread throughout the tissue of the ant, including the muscles and head, but actively avoid the brain. Once it grows large enough, the fungal biomass starts to alter the ant's behavior, excreting immune and stress response chemicals similar to GABA-like compounds that move, disrupting normal signaling in the ant. The fungus makes the ant leave its normal trails, move erratically, and isolate itself from other nestmates. Eventually, the fungus takes over the ant's nervous system, and it secretes even more bioactive compounds in the neuromodulators near the ant's nervous system and muscle, causing the ant to wander and tremor. Then, at a very specific time of day, the fungus compels the ant to climb up vegetation, choosing times when temperature and humidity favor fungal growth. The ant is forced by the fungus's mind control to climb higher and higher until it reaches the underside of a leaf or branch. The ant then bites down and locks its mandibles into the edge permanently, called a death grip, hanging there until it dies, with the fungal mycelium also cementing the body onto the leaf by growing out of the ant's shell. After the ant dies, the fungus continues digesting the body from the inside, consuming all the soft tissue and leaving behind only the outer shell. Within a couple of days, a stalk-like fruiting body bursts out of the ant's head and grows over the corpse. The fruiting body then develops more spores and releases them into the environment. The spores fall back and land on the forest floor, starting the cycle again. Another even more disturbing aspect of this fungus is that it's not very rare. In some cases, scientists have found literal entire graveyards of ants, with all the ants locked onto leaves in the exact same death bite position. Each one of these ants has been controlled and killed by the same fungus, with each death only serving to spread it even farther. All these ants have been taken over without any idea, with the fungus having no opinions, thoughts, or feelings about any of this, except the inner drive to continue spreading to the next insect or ant. Ophiocordyceps unilaterus has also been around for tens of millions of years. The oldest known physical evidence of this fungus in action dates back to about 48 million years ago. Scientists have even discovered a perfectly preserved leaf fossil from the Messel pit in Germany that shows the distinct bite scars of an ant making its final fatal death grip on a leaf vein. And that's just physical evidence, with the evolutionary timeline dating back to over 100 million years, meaning that this thing has not only evolved, but has been strong enough to survive at all different parts of Earth. And it raises the question of whether, if it was ever forced to adapt to warm-blooded mammals, it could. These kind of zombie fungi are not unique to ants either. You know the photos I showed in the beginning of the video? That fungus is called Endiarantium areum. It has a 100% mortality rate in spiders. Endiarantium areum is a fungus in the family of Cordycipitaceae. This fungus infects spiders in a similar way. The spores land on a silver spider's body and then penetrate its exoskeleton. Then the mold begins to grow inside the spider. Eventually the fungus gets so strong it takes over the entire spider and consumes it from the inside out. What makes it especially disturbing is the visual it leaves afterward. The spider becomes a pale, fuzzy white ghost of its former self, completely consumed in fungal growth. What looks like just dust or a frozen spider is actually a spider that was slowly consumed alive. As you can see from the videos, this parasitic fungus also spreads extremely fast, where people will often see entire graveyards of these spiders that seem to be frozen in time, when the truth is they are all victims of one thoughtless villain, a villain that has no idea what it's even doing or has done, the fungi. With that terrifying thought, my research then leads us to the most disturbing fungus on this list. This fungus is known as Massospora, and it mainly infects cicadas. In 1845, John H.B. Latrobe read a memoir from Benjamin Banneker at a meeting of Maryland Historical Society. Latrobe read a report written by Banneker in April 1800, where Banneker describes strange things happening with the brood X, the type of cicada that lived where he was. Banneker wrote the haunting words, "Begin to sing or make a noise from first they come out of earth till they die. Their hindermost parts rots off, and it does not appear to be any pain to them, for they still continue on singing till they die." It wasn't until 1879 that Charles Horton Peck described the fungus and named it Masopora cicadina. It was later studied in depth in 1920 by Speer, who found the fungus spread extremely quickly when given nutrients in his lab. While most of the fungi previously mentioned aim to consume and kill the insect fairly quickly, this fungi keeps the cicada alive and instead slowly replaces parts of his body with fungal tissue. In some cases, scientists have observed entire sections of the cicada abdomen falling off, only to be replaced with a solid mass of fungus spores. At stage 1, the fungus attaches to the cicada when the nymph is digging its way to the surface from the soil. These infected cicadas also act strangely, spending more time walking around and dragging their abdomen on the ground, which is thought to increase the spread of the fungus. The fungus continues to spread in the cicada's abdomen and body. A horrifying fact is that despite the cicada essentially deteriorating as the mold consumes it, the cicada will continue to fly around. Even more disturbing are the effects the fungus has on the cicada's behavior. Infected males will start acting like females to attract other males. Once the other males come into contact, they become infected with the spores. The cicada literally becomes a living spore dispenser, spreading the fungus while it is being eaten alive. Parasites have even been known to possibly affect dinosaurs. Sioux is one of the largest T-Rex specimens ever found and also one of the most complete and best preserved fossils. Measuring over 40 feet long and about 13 feet tall at the hip, it's an incredible fossil. When paleontologists first examined Sioux, they noticed something strange. There were a series of neat, perfectly round holes in the lower jaw. Normally these could be explained by bite marks, but these were different and didn't look random. In 2009, a study matched these holes to lesions seen in birds with a parasitic infection called trichomoniasis. The idea was that the parasite spread into the dinosaur's mouth and jaw, slowly creating lesions that made it difficult or impossible for Sioux to eat, potentially leading to starvation. While newer studies argue these lesions don't match the parasite well enough, the holes in Sioux's jaws are still an open question in paleontology and don't completely rule out a fungus or parasite. And when you take a step back and look at all these different cases, it gets extremely unsettling. All these different insects being taken over by fungus aren't just a single horror. These are fungi that have existed for millions of years, with each one slowly evolving over time to become as perfect as possible at spreading to its next victim. At that point, it's almost completely normal in nature. Insects and entire species can be controlled to do something they would never rationally do, only to be consumed from the inside out and then replaced as the spores spread to the next host. All this happens with the fungi having zero awareness or intent behind it. I mean, these fungi aren't a villain, they don't have some big evil plan. Instead, this is just a result of biology. It's a spore eat spore world out there, with zombies and infections being a closer reality than many people think. For now, we're safe with our warm bodies and other weird mammal adaptations, though humans have only been around for roughly 300,000 years. So maybe the fungi just need some time to catch up.